I won $34 million in the lottery and told no one. Only my sister-in-law noticed something strange the night the entire family turned against me. My name is Aileen, and I am 32 years old. For 3 months, I carried a secret so heavy, it changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. That one night when everyone I trusted showed their true colors, only one person saw through the cracks. And she was the last person I ever expected. Why did I hide $34 million from my own husband before I tell you everything? Let me know where you are watching from today. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to follow this journey with me. Trust me, by the end of this story, you will never look at family the same way again. I met Marcus 7 years ago at a small coffee shop downtown. I had just graduated from college with a degree in accounting, and I was struggling to find my first real job. Money was tight, and I remember counting every dollar I spent on my daily coffee, always choosing the smallest size because that was all I could afford. Marcus was different back then. He noticed me sitting alone in the corner, flipping through job listings on my laptop with a worried expression on my face. He walked over, introduced himself, and asked if the seat across from me was taken. I said no, and that simple moment changed the course of my entire life. He was gentle and attentive in those early days. He would listen to me talk about my fears and dreams without interrupting. He remembered small details about my life that even I sometimes forgot. When I finally landed my first job as a junior accountant at a mid-sized company, he took me out to celebrate at a restaurant that was probably too expensive for his budget at the time. But he insisted, saying I deserved to feel special. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. It was nothing extravagant, just a quiet evening at the same coffee shop where we first met. He got down on one knee and asked me to spend the rest of my life with him. I said yes without hesitation, because I believed I had found my safe harbor. After we got married, we moved into a small apartment about 15 minutes from his mother's house. The place was old with creaky floors and windows that let in too much cold air during winter, but I tried my best to make it feel like home. I bought secondhand furniture and painted the walls a warm shade of yellow. I hung up photos of us from our wedding day and placed fresh flowers on the kitchen table whenever I could afford them. Marcus always promised we would buy our own house someday. He said he was saving up, and once we had enough, we would find a place with a backyard and a room for the children we talked about having. 5 years passed, and that promise remained just words floating in the air between us. His mother, Diane, lived in a large house that her late husband had left her when he passed away 12 years ago. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn. Every month she hosted a mandatory family gathering that all her children were expected to attend. Missing one of these dinners was not an option unless you wanted to face her wrath for weeks afterward. Gregory, Marcus's older brother, was the golden child of the family. He was 38 years old and worked as a partner at a prestigious law firm in the city. He had bought his own house in an upscale neighborhood 3 years ago, and Diane never missed an opportunity to mention how proud she was of him. Gregory drove a luxury car, wore expensive suits, and spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his life. Lorraine was Marcus's younger sister. At 28, she still lived with Diane and had never held a stable job for more than a few months at a time. Despite this, Diane treated her like a princess, buying her designer clothes and jewelry whenever she asked. Lorraine had a sharp tongue and a talent for making others feel small. She seemed to enjoy watching people squirm under her critical gaze. And then there was me, the outsider. The girl who grew up in foster care after losing both parents in a car accident when I was 7. The girl who worked her way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. The girl who had nothing to offer but her heart. From the very first family dinner I attended as Marcus's girlfriend, I felt Diane's disapproval like a cold wind cutting through me. She would look at my clothes, my shoes, my hair, and I could see the judgment forming behind her eyes. She never said anything outright cruel in front of Marcus back then, but her questions were always pointed. Where did you grow up? Oh, foster care. How unfortunate. What do your parents do? Oh, they passed away. I see. Over the years, her subtlety faded. She became more direct with her criticisms, especially when Marcus was not in the room. She told me I was not good enough for her son. She asked when I was going to give her grandchildren, implying that my inability to get pregnant after 5 years of marriage was somehow my fault. She reminded me that Marcus could have married someone from a better family, someone with connections and resources. But there was one person in that family who never made me feel like an outsider. Priscilla Gregory's wife came from a wealthy family in Connecticut. Her parents owned several businesses, and she had grown up with every privilege imaginable. By all accounts, she should have been just like the rest of them, looking down on me from her pedestal of privilege. Instead, Priscilla was kind. She had a warm smile and a gentle way of speaking that made you feel heard. She never interrupted me when I talked, never rolled her eyes at my stories, never made snide comments about my clothes or my job. During family gatherings, she would often sit next to me and include me in conversations when others ignored me. I remember one particular dinner when Diane spent 20 minutes criticizing my cooking, saying the dish I brought was too bland and unimaginative. Everyone at the table stayed silent, including Marcus, who just stared at his plate. But Priscilla quietly got up from her seat, walked over to me, and handed me a glass of water. She squeezed my shoulder gently and whispered that she thought my dish was delicious. It was such a small gesture, but in that moment it meant everything. I never let myself get too close to Priscilla, though. I was afraid that if I showed too much gratitude or tried to form a real friendship with her, Diane would find a way to punish us both. So I kept my distance, appreciating her kindness from afar, while protecting her from becoming a target alongside me. Every Friday after work, I had a small ritual that no one knew about. I would stop by the convenience store near my office and buy a lottery ticket. Just one, always $2. I never told Marcus, because he thought gambling was a waste of money. He would say things like playing the lottery is just a tax on people who are bad at math. So I kept it to myself, this tiny act of hope that I allowed myself once a week. One Friday afternoon, about 3.5 months before everything fell apart, I walked into that same convenience store after a particularly exhausting day at work. My boss had criticized a report I spent weeks preparing. Marcus had texted me earlier saying he would be home late because he was helping his mother with something. I felt invisible and unimportant, like I always did. I picked up a lottery ticket and chose my numbers without much thought. I remember standing at the counter looking at the colorful slip of paper in my hand and thinking that nothing ever really changes. I tucked the ticket into my wallet and forgot about it almost immediately. That Sunday morning changed everything. Marcus was still asleep when I woke up that Sunday. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside our window. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table with my phone, scrolling through emails and news articles. As I slowly woke up, I almost forgot to check the lottery results. It was only when I saw an advertisement for the state lottery that I remembered the ticket still sitting in my wallet. I pulled it out, smoothing the creased paper against the table, and opened the lottery website on my phone. The numbers appeared on the screen one by one. I looked at my ticket, then back at the screen, then at my ticket again. My heart stopped. All 6 numbers matched. I checked again, certain I was making a mistake. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I counted the numbers out loud, whispering each one to myself like a prayer. 5, 17, 23, 31, 44, and the Powerball 12. They all matched. The jackpot amount displayed on the screen made my vision blur. $34 million. After taxes, I would receive approximately $22 million. I had to cover my mouth with both hands to stop myself from screaming. Tears started streaming down my face, and I did not know if they were from joy or shock or something else entirely. My first instinct was to run into the bedroom and wake Marcus. I wanted to shake him awake and tell him that our lives had just changed forever. No more cramped apartment. No more broken promises about buying a house. No more worrying about money or feeling inadequate compared to his successful brother. But then I stopped. I stood in the middle of our small kitchen, clutching that lottery ticket like it was the most precious thing in the world, and a thought crept into my mind that I could not shake. If I told Marcus what would happen, he would tell Diane. Of course he would. He told his mother everything. And once Diane knew, everyone would know. Gregory, Lorraine, Walter, all of them. I thought about how Diane had called me a burden just 2 weeks ago. I thought about how Lorraine had laughed at my secondhand dress at the last family dinner. I thought about how Marcus had stood by silently while his mother tore me apart, never once defending me. What would they do if they found out I suddenly had $34 million? Would they finally treat me with respect? Would they suddenly want to include me in conversations, invite me to lunch, ask for my opinions? Or would they just see me as a source of money, a problem that had suddenly become an opportunity, I realized with painful clarity that any change in their behavior would not be genuine. It would not come from love or respect. It would come from greed, and I was not sure I could handle watching people pretend to care about me just because of what I could give them. So I made a decision that would change everything. I would not tell anyone, not Marcus, not Priscilla, no one. I wanted to see the truth. I wanted to know once and for all whether anyone in this family actually loved me for who I was not, for what I could provide. 2 days later, I took a personal day off work without telling Marcus. I dressed in plain clothes, put on a pair of sunglasses, and drove 2 hours to the state lottery office in the Capitol. I parked in a far corner of the lot and walked inside with my heart pounding in my chest. The process was surreal. I filled out paperwork, provided identification, and signed more documents than I could count. When I asked about anonymity, the clerk told me that my state allowed winners to remain anonymous if they claimed through a trust. I immediately agreed, setting up a blind trust with a generic name that could never be traced back to me. The money would be deposited into a new bank account at a financial institution I had never used before. It would be completely separate from the joint account I shared with Marcus, from any records he could access, from any trail that could lead back to my secret. When I walked out of that office, I felt like a different person. On the outside, nothing had changed. I was still Aileen, the quiet accountant with the secondhand clothes and the critical mother-in-law. But on the inside, I carried a secret that shifted the very foundation of my existence. For 3 months, I lived a double life. During the day, I went to work as usual. I sat at my desk, crunched numbers, attended meetings, and pretended that everything was normal. I drove home in my old car, cooked dinner in our cramped kitchen, and listened to Marcus complain about his job and his mother and his brother. At night, while Marcus slept, I would sometimes lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the money sitting in that account. I checked the balance occasionally, just to make sure it was real. Each time I saw those numbers, I felt a strange mixture of power and guilt. I started making small changes that no one noticed. I paid off the remainder of my student loans, the debt I had been carrying since I graduated almost a decade ago. It disappeared overnight, and when the confirmation email arrived, I deleted it immediately so Marcus would not see. I made an anonymous donation to the foster care facility where I spent most of my childhood. I remembered the worn-out mattresses, the cramped rooms, the feeling of being forgotten by the world. I wanted to give those kids something better, even if they would never know it came from me. Every time Diane criticized me, every time Lorraine rolled her eyes, every time Marcus failed to stand up for me, I reminded myself of the truth they did not know. I could leave at any moment. I could walk away from all of them and never look back. But I stayed because I needed to see their true faces. I needed to understand without any doubt what kind of people they really were. And the answer came on the night of Diane's birthday party. The invitation arrived exactly 1 month before Diane's 62nd birthday. It was not really an invitation so much as a summons, a formal card with gold lettering commanding our presence at her home for an evening of celebration. Attendance, as always, was mandatory. Lorraine called Marcus 3 days after the card arrived. I could hear her shrill voice through the phone, even though he had not put it on speaker. She reminded him that last year's gift had been embarrassing. A simple set of scented candles and a gift card, which Diane had apparently complained about for weeks afterward. Lorraine made it clear that this year Marcus needed to do better. The family reputation was at stake. After the call, Marcus turned to me with stress etched across his face. He said we needed to find something more expensive, something that would impress his mother and show that we were not the failures everyone seemed to think we were. I asked how much he wanted to spend. He said at least $500, maybe more. When I reminded him that we were supposed to be saving for a down payment on a house, he waved his hand dismissively and said we would figure it out later. I felt something harden inside me at that moment. For years he had promised me a home of our own, and now he was willing to throw away our savings just to impress a woman who had never shown me an ounce of kindness. But I said nothing. I just nodded and agreed to help him find a suitable gift. 2 weeks before the party, Gregory called Marcus. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard Marcus answer the phone. He put it on speaker, without realizing I could hear everything. Gregory's voice filled the room, confident and self-satisfied. He said he had found the perfect gift for their mother, a diamond necklace worth $15,000, custom designed by a jeweler that celebrities used. He described it in detail, the clarity of the stones, the elegance of the setting, the way it would look against their mother's skin. I watched Marcus's face fall as his brother spoke. His jaw tightened, and I could see him shrinking into himself, becoming smaller, with every word Gregory said. After the call ended, Marcus did not speak for a long time. When he finally looked at me, his eyes held something I had never seen before: resentment. And it was directed at me. He asked why I did not make more money, why I had chosen to be an accountant instead of something more lucrative, why I could not contribute more to our household income. Each question felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. I stood there, hands still wet from the dishes, and absorbed every word without responding. I thought about the $22 million sitting in my secret account. I could have told him right then and there. I could have wiped that look off his face forever, but I did not. Instead, I just said I was sorry and that I would try to find a better gift within our budget. 1 week before the party, news spread through the family that Walter was in serious trouble. Walter was Diane's brother-in-law, Marcus's uncle on his father's side. He was 60 years old and had spent his life building a real estate investment business. He drove expensive cars, wore gold watches, and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how successful he was, but apparently, his success had been built on a foundation of sand. Bad investments, market downturns, and poor decisions had wiped out nearly everything he had. According to the whispers that traveled through the family, Walter was facing bankruptcy. He needed money urgently, possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars, just to keep his head above water. Diane was mortified. The idea that someone in her family could be publicly exposed as a failure was unbearable to her. She ordered everyone to keep the information private. No one outside the immediate family could know about Walter's situation. Lorraine told Marcus in hushed tones that Walter had already started approaching family members for loans. Gregory had apparently refused, immediately citing his own financial obligations. Lorraine said she had nothing to give, which everyone knew was true since she had never earned her own money in her life. Marcus hung up the phone, looking pale. He turned to me and said he hoped Walter would not ask us for anything because we had nothing to offer. I simply nodded, keeping my face neutral, hiding the irony that burned in my chest. 3 days before the birthday party, Priscilla stopped by our apartment unexpectedly. She said she was in the neighborhood and wanted to return a cookbook I had lent her months ago. I invited her in for coffee, grateful for a break from the tension that had been building in my marriage. We sat at the kitchen table talking about nothing in particular: the weather, a new restaurant that had opened downtown, a television show we both enjoyed. At some point, I excused myself to use the bathroom. When I came back, I noticed Priscilla's gaze lingering on the table where I had left some mail. Among the bills and advertisements was an envelope from the bank, where I kept my secret account. I had been careless, leaving it out in the open instead of hiding it as I usually did. I grabbed the envelope quickly and stuffed it into a drawer, trying to act casual. But when I looked at Priscilla, I saw something in her eyes, a question she was too polite to ask. She did not say anything about it. Instead, she smiled warmly and changed the subject, asking me how I was preparing for Diane's party. But I noticed that she looked at me differently for the rest of her visit. Not with suspicion exactly, but with curiosity. Like she was trying to solve a puzzle she had not known existed. After she left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. The evening of Diane's birthday party arrived faster than I expected. Marcus spent an hour getting ready, changing his shirt 3 times, before settling on a blue button-down that he thought made him look successful. I put on a simple black dress that I had owned for years, one that Lorraine had already mocked at a previous gathering. We arrived at Diane's house just as the sun was setting. The colonial mansion glowed with warm light from every window, and I could see silhouettes of people moving inside. My stomach tightened as we walked up the brick pathway to the front door. Gregory and Priscilla were already there when we entered. Gregory stood near the fireplace, holding a glass of wine, and speaking with an older man I did not recognize. Priscilla sat on the sofa, and when she saw me, she gave me a small wave and a genuine smile. It was the only warm greeting I would receive that night. Diane swept toward us the moment we crossed the threshold. She embraced Marcus first, holding him for several seconds, and telling him how handsome he looked. When she turned to me, her smile became frozen. She gave me a brief nod and a single word of acknowledgement before turning her attention elsewhere. Lorraine appeared moments later wearing a stunning designer gown that must have cost thousands of dollars. She announced to anyone who would listen that it was a birthday gift from Diane purchased just for this occasion. She twirled once to show off the way it moved, then caught my eye and smirked at my simple black dress. Walter arrived late looking thinner and more haggard than I had ever seen him. The confident businessman I remembered from previous gatherings was gone, replaced by a man who seemed to be collapsing under invisible weight. He greeted Diane with hollow enthusiasm and quickly found a corner where he could nurse a drink in relative solitude. Dinner was elaborate and uncomfortable. Diane had hired a caterer, and the food was arranged beautifully on silver platters. But the conversation was stilted, filled with false laughter and thinly veiled competition. After the meal, everyone gathered in the living room for the gift presentation. This was the moment Marcus had been dreading all month. Gregory went first. He and Priscilla presented an elegant velvet box tied with a silk ribbon. Diane opened it with theatrical anticipation and gasped at the diamond necklace inside. She held it up to the light, watching the stones sparkle, and pulled Gregory into a long embrace. She told him he was the most thoughtful son a mother could ask for. She looked at Priscilla and thanked her for being part of their family. Lorraine went next. She unveiled a large oil painting that she claimed to have created herself, though I suspected she had commissioned someone else to paint it. The artwork depicted a garden scene, vibrant and colorful, exactly the kind of thing Diane loved. Diane praised her daughter's artistic talent and said she would hang it in the main hallway where everyone could admire it. Then it was our turn. Marcus stood up slowly, holding the gift bag we had brought. His hands were trembling slightly as he handed it to his mother. I watched Diane's face as she reached inside and pulled out the silk scarf set and box of premium chocolates we had selected together. She held the items for a moment, examining them with an expression I could not quite read. Then she looked up at Marcus and said, "Thank you, but next time, try not to strain yourselves." The room fell silent. Lorraine covered her mouth, barely suppressing a laugh. Gregory shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Priscilla looked down at her hands. Marcus's face turned red. He mumbled something about how we wanted to get something thoughtful, but Diane had already set the gifts aside and moved on to opening cards from distant relatives. I sat there frozen, feeling the familiar sting of humiliation spreading through my chest. But this time, something else was there too. A cold clarity that cut through the pain. After the gifts, Walter finally made his move. He approached Gregory first, pulling him aside for what he probably hoped would be a private conversation. But voices carry in that old house, and I could hear enough to understand what was happening. Walter was asking for money, a lot of it. Gregory refused, his voice firm and unapologetic. He said he had his own family to think about and could not risk his financial security on a bad investment. Walter moved on to Marcus next. I watched my husband's body language shift as his uncle leaned in close, speaking in urgent whispers. When they finished talking, Marcus looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Walter had asked for $50,000, money we did not have, money we had never had. Marcus told him the truth. We were living paycheck to paycheck. We had nothing to spare. Walter's face twisted with frustration, and he muttered something I could not hear before walking away. Then Walter turned his attention to me. He cornered me near the dining room, his breath smelling of whiskey, his eyes desperate. He said he knew I worked in finance. Surely I could find a way to help. Surely I could pull some strings, access some funds, do something. I told him I was just an accountant. I did not have access to any money that was not my own. He laughed bitterly and said that was exactly what Marcus had told him. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said my husband married a poor orphan, and now he was poor too. He said it was no wonder Diane was disappointed. I felt the words hit me like physical blows. But before I could respond, Diane appeared beside us. She had heard Walter's comment, and instead of defending me, she nodded in agreement. She said she had always worried about Marcus's choice of wife. She said a man could only go as far as his partner would allow, and she looked at me when she said it. What followed was a speech I will never forget. Diane stood in the center of the room, her audience captive, and began to speak about family values and success. She praised Gregory for his achievements, commended Lorraine for her artistic talents, and expressed concern for Marcus. She said he had potential, but he had been held back. She said he deserved better than a life of mediocrity. She never said my name. She did not have to, Everyone in the room knew exactly who she was talking about. Lorraine jumped in, adding her own observations. She mentioned how I always wore the same outfits to family events, how I never contributed interesting conversation, how I seemed uncomfortable and out of place at every gathering. Gregory remained silent throughout, his expression unreadable, but his silence was its own kind of condemnation. And Marcus, my husband of 5 years, the man who had promised to love and protect me. He sat across the room staring at the floor, saying nothing. When I caught his eye, hoping for some sign of support, he looked away. His face was filled not with sympathy or anger on my behalf, but with embarrassment. Like I was the problem. Like I had brought this on myself. I felt tears building behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give Diane that satisfaction. Under the table, I felt a hand reach for mine. I looked down and saw Priscilla's fingers intertwining with my own. She squeezed gently, and when I glanced at her face, I saw pain and compassion there. She did not say a word, but her message was clear. I see you. I am here. It was the only kindness I received that entire night. The drive home was suffocating. Marcus did not speak for the first 10 minutes. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I sat in the passenger seat, my mind replaying every word his mother had said, every look his family had given me, every moment my husband had failed to defend me. When we finally walked through the door of our apartment, the silence broke. Marcus exploded. He blamed me for everything, for embarrassing him in front of his family, for not being successful enough, for making him look like a failure compared to Gregory. His words came fast and sharp, each one cutting deeper than the last. He said he should have listened to his mother from the beginning. He said marrying me was the biggest mistake of his life. He said maybe they were right, maybe I was holding him back, maybe he deserved someone who could actually contribute to their life together. I stood in the middle of our small living room, absorbing every accusation without responding. Part of me wanted to scream back. Part of me wanted to tell him about the $22 million that could buy 100 of Gregory's diamond necklaces. Part of me wanted to watch his face change when he realized the poor orphan he was blaming had more money than his entire family combined. But I said nothing, because in that moment, I understood something with devastating clarity. Marcus did not love me. Maybe he never had. He loved the idea of what I could be for him. A supportive wife, a quiet partner, someone who would make his life easier without demanding too much in return. But he did not love me for who I actually was. Marcus packed a bag that night. He said he was going to stay at his mother's house for a few days to clear his head. He said he needed time to think about whether our marriage could be saved. I watched him walk out the door without trying to stop him. After he left, I sat alone in our empty apartment surrounded by furniture we had bought together, photographs of a life that suddenly felt like a lie. The silence pressed down on me like a physical weight. The next morning, my phone started buzzing with messages. Lorraine sent a text that said, I should know my place and stop making her brother's life difficult. Gregory sent a formal message suggesting that I consider whether this marriage was beneficial for anyone involved. Even Diane called her voice cold and matter-of-fact, saying she would support Marcus no matter what decision he made, implying heavily that divorce was the best option for everyone. I read each message without responding. Every word confirmed what I had suspected for years. This family had never accepted me. They had tolerated me at best, despised me at worst. And now that they sensed weakness, they were circling like vultures. I spent that day wandering around the apartment in a daze. I made coffee but forgot to drink it. I turned on the television but did not register anything on the screen. I looked at photos from our wedding day and wondered how the smiling man in those pictures had become the person who walked out on me last night. Around 3 p.m, there was a knock at the door. I was not expecting anyone. For a brief moment, I thought it might be Marcus coming back to apologize. But when I opened the door, I found Priscilla standing there holding a paper bag. She was carrying coffee from a local shop I liked and pastries from a bakery I had mentioned months ago. She asked if she could come in, and I stepped aside without thinking. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had discovered my lottery winnings, the same table where I had hidden the envelope she might have seen. For a few minutes, we just sat in silence, sipping our drinks, neither of us knowing how to begin. Finally, Priscilla spoke. She said she knew something was going on with me, something I was not telling anyone. She said she had noticed changes over the past few months, small things that did not add up. The way I seemed calmer during family dinners, even when Diane was cruel. The way I no longer flinched at criticism. The way I carried myself with quiet confidence that had not been there before. She mentioned the envelope she had glimpsed during her last visit. A bank I had never mentioned before. An account that clearly was not connected to Marcus. I felt my heart racing as she spoke. This was the moment I had feared. Exposure, judgment, betrayal. But Priscilla did not demand answers. She did not threaten to tell Marcus or Diane. Instead, she leaned forward and said something that broke through every wall I had built. She said she did not need to know my secrets. She said whatever I was carrying, I did not have to carry it alone. She said she had watched how this family treated me for years, and she was ashamed that she had not done more to stand up for me. She said that no matter what, no matter how much money I had or did not have, she would always see me as her sister. Her real sister. Not in law, not by marriage, but by choice. I started crying. Years of pain and loneliness came pouring out of me in waves. I cried for the little girl who grew up without parents. I cried for the young woman who married a man hoping for safety and love. I cried for the wife who spent 5 years trying to earn acceptance from people who would never give it. And through it all, Priscilla held my hand and did not let go. When the tears finally stopped, I made a decision. Priscilla had earned my trust. She was the only person in that family, maybe in my entire life, who had loved me without conditions. So I told her everything. I told her about the lottery ticket, about the $34 million, about the anonymous trust and the secret bank account, about my decision to stay silent and see how people treated me when they thought I had nothing. Priscilla listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me and said I was the bravest person she had ever met. She said most people would have immediately used the money to buy love and acceptance. But I had chosen the harder path. I had chosen to seek truth instead of comfort. And in doing so, I had discovered exactly what I needed to know. She asked me what I was going to do now. I told her I was done. Done pretending. Done hoping for love that would never come. Done sacrificing my happiness for people who saw me as worthless. Priscilla nodded slowly. Then she asked me one question that changed everything. She asked whether I had ever been loved for who I truly was, or only for what people thought I could give them. The answer was obvious, and it was devastating. That night after Priscilla left, I stayed awake until dawn. I sat by the window of our apartment watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness, thinking about everything that had led me to this moment. Every compromise I had made, every insult I had swallowed, every time I had chosen peace over self-respect. By the time the sun rose, I had made my decision. I was going to leave Marcus. I was going to leave this family. I was going to start a new life, one where I was not constantly fighting to prove my worth to people who had already decided I was worthless. The first thing I did was call a divorce lawyer. I found one with excellent reviews who specialized in high asset cases, though of course she did not know just how high the assets would be. I scheduled an appointment for the following week. The second thing I did was start looking for a new apartment, somewhere far from Diane's house. Far from the neighborhood where I had spent 5 years feeling like a stranger. I found a few listings in a different part of the city, places that were bright and modern, and completely different from anywhere I had ever lived. The third thing I did was nothing. I waited. 3 days after the birthday party, Marcus came back. He walked through the door with a bouquet of flowers and a practiced expression of contrition. He said he had done a lot of thinking while he was at his mother's house. He said he realized he had been too harsh. He said he wanted to work on our marriage and move forward together. I listened to his apology with a strange sense of detachment. The words washed over me without penetrating. I had heard versions of this speech before, after smaller arguments, smaller betrayals. He would be sorry for a few days, maybe a week, and then everything would go back to exactly how it was. But this time, something was different. He started asking questions about money, casual questions at first. How much did I have in my savings account? Had I gotten any bonuses at work lately? Was there any way I could take out a loan against my retirement fund? When I asked why he wanted to know, he told me about Walter. Apparently, Walter's situation had gotten worse. He was facing legal action from creditors. He needed money immediately, tens of thousands of dollars, or he would lose everything. Diane had decided that the family needed to come together to help him. Even Gregory had reluctantly agreed to contribute, though Marcus suspected he was only doing it to maintain appearance. Marcus looked at me with desperate eyes and asked if there was any way I could help. I understood then why he had really come back. It was not because he loved me. It was not because he had realized his mistakes. It was because he thought I might be useful. He thought the poor orphan accountant might be able to scrounge up some money to save his uncle. I told him I had nothing to give. And for the first time, I felt no guilt about the lie. 4 days later, Diane summoned the entire family to an emergency dinner. The purpose was clear. She wanted to coordinate the effort to save Walter. She wanted to assess what everyone could contribute. She wanted to present a united front against the embarrassment of having a bankrupt family member. I arrived at the dinner with Marcus dressed simply as I always did, showing nothing of the turmoil inside me. But this time, I was not afraid. I was not hoping for acceptance or bracing for criticism. I was walking into that house knowing exactly who these people were and exactly what I was going to do. Diane started the meeting by explaining Walter's situation in dramatic terms. She talked about the family legacy, the importance of reputation, the duty they all had to support each other in times of crisis. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each person, her expression demanding compliance. Gregory spoke first. He said he had spoken with his financial advisor and could contribute $25,000 from his investment portfolio. He made it clear this was a significant sacrifice and expected to be repaid once Walter recovered. Lorraine said she had nothing to offer, but was willing to help in other ways, perhaps organizing a fundraiser or reaching out to family friends. No one pointed out that she had never organized anything in her life. Then Diane looked at Marcus. Marcus cleared his throat and said that we would do whatever we could. He said he would talk to his bank about a personal loan. He looked at me as he spoke, his eyes silently pleading with me to go along with whatever he promised. I let him finish. Then I stood up. Everyone turned to look at me. I could see the surprise on their faces. The quiet daughter-in-law never spoke up at family meetings. She never volunteered opinions or inserted herself into discussions. She sat in the corner and accepted whatever was decided for her. Not anymore. I said I had something important to share with everyone. I told them that 3 months ago I had won the state lottery, $34 million before taxes. I told them I had kept it secret because I wanted to see how people would treat me when they thought I had nothing. And I told them that now I knew. The room fell completely silent. Diane's mouth dropped open. Gregory's face went pale. Lorraine looked like she might faint. Walter sat up straight for the first time all evening, his eyes suddenly alive with hope. Marcus stared at me like he had never seen me before. I continued speaking before anyone could interrupt. I reminded them of every insult they had thrown at me over the years. Every time Diane had called me a burden. Every time Lorraine had mocked my clothes. Every time Gregory had treated me like I was beneath him. Every time Marcus had failed to defend me. I reminded Marcus specifically of the night of the birthday party. How he had blamed me for his embarrassment. How he had walked out on me. How he had only come back when he thought I could be useful. I told them I would not be giving anyone any money, not for Walter, not for anything, because they had shown me exactly who they were when they thought I had nothing, and I would not reward that behavior. I looked directly at Diane and said I was done being her scapegoat. I looked at Marcus and said I wanted a divorce. I looked at Gregory and Lorraine and Walter and said I would be walking out of this house and this family, and I would never look back. Then I turned to Priscilla. She was sitting quietly, a small smile on her face, tears glistening in her eyes. I thanked her for being the only person who had ever treated me with kindness and respect. I told her she was the sister I had always wanted and never had. I told her that no matter what happened, she would always have a place in my life. Then I walked out of that house, leaving chaos behind me. The weeks after I left were both the hardest and most liberating of my life. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. It was nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom unit with white walls and minimal furniture. But it was mine, completely, entirely mine. I could make my own choices about everything from what to eat for dinner to how to spend my weekends. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The divorce process was surprisingly straightforward. Marcus tried to contest at first, suddenly claiming that our marriage was worth saving, that we could work things out. if I would just give him another chance. But his arguments fell apart quickly. He had not been fighting for me. He had been fighting for access to my money. When his lawyer explained that my lottery winnings were protected in a trust established before our separation, his interest in reconciliation evaporated. The papers were signed within 2 months. I walked out of the courthouse on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, officially free. I did not feel triumphant. I felt empty in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. Like a house that had been cleared of old furniture, dusty and quiet, but ready for something new. Healing took time. In the beginning, I cried almost every night. Not for Marcus specifically, but for the years I had lost. For the person I had been, the woman who had tried so hard to earn love that was never going to come. For all the times I had silenced myself, diminished myself, made myself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. But slowly, the tears came less frequently. I started to rebuild. I used some of the money to establish a small charitable foundation focused on helping children in foster care. I remembered what it felt like to grow up without a family, to wonder if anyone would ever choose me. I wanted other kids to know that someone cared, even if that someone was a stranger who had once been exactly where they were. I went back to school part-time, taking classes in financial management and nonprofit administration. I wanted to do more than just give money away. I wanted to understand how to make a real, lasting difference. I made new friends, people who knew nothing about my past or my money. We met for coffee, went to movies, took long walks in the park. They liked me for my sense of humor, my curiosity, my willingness to listen. They had no idea I was worth millions, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Priscilla stayed in touch just as she had promised. She called every few weeks, sometimes just to chat, sometimes to share updates about the family I had left behind. She told me that Marcus had moved back in with Diane. He was drinking more than he used to and had been passed over for a promotion at work. She told me that Walter had eventually declared bankruptcy and was now living in a small apartment dependent on what little Diane could spare. She told me that Gregory and Lorraine had grown even more entitled, if that was possible, and that family dinners were now filled with bitter silences and unspoken resentments. She never asked me for money, not once. When I offered to help her start a small business, she had mentioned wanting to run. She thanked me but said she needed to do it on her own terms. That was when I knew I had been right to trust her. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Marcus at a coffee shop. It was pure coincidence. I had walked in to grab a latte before a meeting, and there he was sitting alone at a corner table with dark circles under his eyes and a half-empty cup in front of him. He saw me before I could leave. He called my name, and something in his voice made me stop. I walked over to his table. He looked older than I remembered, worn down by something I could not quite name. He asked if I would sit just for a minute. I hesitated, then pulled out the chair across from him. He told me everything had fallen apart since I left. His mother blamed him for losing me the millionaire daughter-in-law she never appreciated until I was gone. His siblings had grown distant. His job was suffering. He said he woke up every morning in his childhood bedroom surrounded by reminders of a life that had never quite worked out. He asked me if things could have been different, if he had defended me that night at the birthday party, if he had chosen me over his family. Would I have stayed? I thought about his question for a long time before answering. I told him that I had spent years trying to earn a place in his life. I had given everything I had, everything except the one thing I should have protected most, my own sense of worth. I told him that by the time I won the lottery, it was already too late. The money did not change how I felt about him. It only revealed what had always been true. I told him that he could have defended me 1,000 times, and it might have made a difference, but he did not. And that was not something either of us could change now. He asked if I could forgive him. I said I already had. Not for his sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick. I had let go of my resentment months ago because carrying it was too heavy. But forgiveness did not mean reconciliation. It did not mean pretending the past had not happened. It meant accepting what was and moving forward. I stood up, wished him well, and walked out of that coffee shop without looking back. The day I left that conversation was the day I truly felt free. I drove home to my little apartment, the one with white walls and simple furniture, and no memories of anyone who had hurt me. I made myself dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed early. As I lay there in the darkness, I thought about everything I had learned. Money does not change people. It reveals them. The family that despised me when they thought I was poor would have pretended to love me if they knew I was rich, but it would have been performance, not truth. And I deserve truth. I learned that the people who truly care about you do not need incentives to show kindness. Priscilla had loved me before she knew about the lottery, and she loved me after. Her affection was not conditional on what I could provide. That was the difference between real love and something that only wore its mask. I learned that walking away is not giving up. Sometimes it is the bravest thing you can do. I spent 5 years trying to fix a situation that was never mine to fix. The moment I chose myself, everything changed. And I learned that healing is possible. Not quick, not easy, but possible. The wounds that seemed fatal 6 months ago are now scars. They are part of my story, but they do not control it. So now I ask you this question. Have you ever stayed somewhere, a relationship, a job, a family, hoping that if you just tried hard enough, people would finally see your value? And if so, did they ever see it? Or did you have to discover it for yourself? I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your story with me. If this video touched your heart, please give it a like so others can find it too. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories like this one. And share it with someone who might need to hear these words today. Thank you for walking this journey with me. I am grateful for every one of you who stayed until the end. Take care of your heart. It is the only one you have, and you deserve to give it to people who will treasure it. Until next time.